Hello and welcome to this video on Social Action Theories 01, Weber, Mead, Blumer and Labelling. Action theories are the opposite of macro-structural approaches, which look at the whole of society and the structure of society and how it shapes individuals. Instead, action approaches focus on the micro level, that is, individuals, their actions and their interactions. Every human being, every individual is said to have free will or free choice. We make our own decisions. Therefore, what we do is voluntaristic. We volunteer to do this rather than deterministic, being told what to do, say, by the structure of society. Human beings therefore possess what is known as agency. We are free to make our own decisions. We are empowered to control our own lives. And we shape society through our choices and the meanings we attach to the things that we do. The first key social action theorist is Max Weber. He believed that structural and action approaches were equally important. It's worth remembering that at the time that Weber was writing, pretty much everyone was a structuralist. Everyone took either a functionalist or a Marxist view of the world. Weber comes along and is very much of the opinion that structure is important, but that actually social action is important too. So that's why we can kind of say that to an extent he's the first social action theorist of note. He therefore believed that sociological explanations were required or had two levels: the level of cause, which was the structural level, so explaining structural factors that shape people's behaviour, and the level of meaning, so individual actions, understanding subjective or personal meanings that individuals attach to their actions. Unless we account for both, Weber argued, our explanation of anything in society will always be incomplete or false. The best example of what Weber was talking about can be found in his very famous seminal work, his Magnum Opus, The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Now, this is something that we'll focus on a lot when we come to study beliefs in society. Thinking about his two levels, however, here, firstly, in terms of the level of structural cause, well, the Protestant Reformation, so the breakaway from Rome, introduced Calvinism, led by John Calvin. This changed people's worldview and therefore their behaviour, leading to the growth of capitalism, Weber argued. So there we have a structural change, a structural cause for changes in people's behaviour. However, on the level of subjective meaning, work, individuals' labours, took on a holy meaning. They believed they were working hard using the talents that God had given them. They were striving to please God because they feared they were going to go to hell, and this motivated them to work harder and harder. They then became quite wealthy. They therefore grew their businesses, and so we see the rise of mercantilism and ultimately capitalism. So for individuals, they may not have been realising that this structural level type stuff was happening or even shaping them, but they had their own individual meanings that they were attaching to their own individual behaviours. And so once again, we see what Weber is talking about here, these two levels, the structural level and more individualistic subjective level. Weber argued that there are infinite number of subjective meanings. What he meant by this is, as human beings with free will, we are able to come up with infinite number of different labels and meanings that we attach to things we do. That's what it means to have free will. Weber tried to classify different meanings that humans have into four different types, based on their meaning for the actor. Firstly, we have instrumental rational actions, which are the most efficient way of achieving something. So an individual does something because logically it's the quickest and easiest way to do it. Value rational actions, actions towards a goal the actor regards as desirable without knowledge whether it will help or work. So doing something because you think it might help, but you're not absolutely sure if it will help you achieve your ends. The example that Weber usually gives here is prayer. Next, traditional actions. That is, we've always done it this way, everyone always does it this way, so we continue to do it this way, even if we don't always know why we actually do this. This could be things like customs, routines, and habits within a society. Finally, affectual actions. That is, actions that express emotions. So sometimes we do things because we want people to know how we feel, even though we may not necessarily be trying to achieve a specific thing. So we may frown because we're angry or upset, and we kind of want people to know we're angry and upset, even though we may not necessarily expect other people to actually do anything about knowing that we are angry and upset. The next key social action theorist we need to think about is George Herbert Mead, and his theory was known as symbolic interactionism. He's going to focus here on the power and the role of symbols. Mead argued that we create the world through our actions and interactions. So everything we do and every time we interact with someone, that's what makes society. Society is not a thing out there that exists external to ourselves. It's us, and every single action or interaction we do, that's what forms society. To all of these things, we attach meanings, so we explain them to ourselves, why we do things. And we convey meanings as human beings often through symbols. A very good example of symbols could be language. So think about our alphabets. Those symbols in of themselves, A, B, C, don't mean anything, but we attach a meaning to them so that A means A and B means B. In a different world or a different reality, B could mean A or A could mean B. The symbols in of themselves mean nothing until we attach meaning to them. Mead thinks it's important to explain the difference here in terms of humans and, say, animals, to understand how it is that humans are, in effect, special because we use symbols in a way that no other creature can. So unlike animals, we do not simply respond to stimuli, we are not pre-programmed in our responses. So if we see an animal and it's behaving in a certain way, it's doing that because it's responding to stimuli around it. Perhaps it's upset, perhaps it's angry, perhaps it's hungry, perhaps it feels fearful, and it will respond naturally in order to do that. As human beings, we are slightly more sophisticated, however. Instead, human beings inhabit a world of symbols. We inhabit a world of things that stand for or represent something else. What we have, therefore, as humans is what Mead refers to as an interpretive phase. We receive information or we receive a stimulus and then we interpret it before we respond to it. And this is different from animals who would just naturally respond without interpreting what's going on. So, once we interpret the meaning, we are able to choose an appropriate response. So if a dog was to snarl at another dog or to bark at another dog, instinctively the dog would take a defensive posture because it thinks to itself, I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to be defensive. It hasn't interpreted what's going on. Instead, it just immediately reacts. It's a natural instinct in that regard. There is no conscious interpretation. Whereas if a person was to walk towards you and shake their fist at you, you would go, well, hold on a minute, what's happening here? Why is that person doing it? You'd have to maybe look at the person. You'd see that they were frowning. They must be angry or upset. They're shaking their fist in an aggressive way. You may start to think to yourself, they don't like me, or they wish me harm, or they're trying to tell me they're angry. And then you're going to choose how to respond. You could do it back. You could attack them. You could run away. You could say, hey, is everything okay? Let's have a cuddle. Who knows? You have the power to interpret it how you so wish. So how do we interpret other people's meanings? Well, what we do as humans is we take the role of the other. That means we place ourselves in their shoes. So in our mind, we engage in empathy. We imagine what it would be like to be that person and then try to imagine why it is they're doing the thing they do. This develops through social interaction. We learn to see ourselves first through the eyes of our significant others, such as our parents. When you're first born, we don't actually do this at all because really we're just trying to survive. As we are slowly socialized and we come to realize there's these people around us that care about us and we want them to think good about us, when we do certain things and we see them respond, we begin to empathize and think, okay, do they like what I'm doing or do they not like what I'm doing? And then we will change our behaviors accordingly. Then we learn to see ourselves through the eyes of a generalized other. So once you've left primary socialization and enter into secondary socialization or wider society, we start to see ourselves as others see us. So we think about what we're doing and how other people might view it. Would they see it as a good thing or a bad thing? And we'll modify our behaviors accordingly. For Mead, to function in society, we need the ability to see ourselves as others see us. So actually, this is very important. That's how society operates, because otherwise we might potentially have conflict. Through shared symbols, we become conscious of the correct ways of acting. And so here we can think about the example of things like road signs. By having the symbols on the road signs, we work out how we're supposed to behave when we're on the road, whether we're a pedestrian, a cyclist, or indeed in a car, and we behave accordingly. We stop when we should stop, we start when we should start, we turn left, we don't turn right, whatever it may be. Blumer then comes along and in many ways systematizes what Mead was talking about, takes it a little bit further. He identifies three key principles, which are our actions are based on meanings we give to situations, events, people, etc. So in any particular scenario, depending on the meanings we give to that scenario, that will dictate our behavior. These meanings arise from the interaction process. They are not fixed but changeable. That is, we learn them. And sometimes things change. So we may behave a certain way when we do something at first, but behave very differently when we do something much later. So say you enter a place of work and you start on the lowest level, the way you behave at first will be commensurate to that. But years later, say if you become a manager in that place of work, you may now start to behave differently. So it's changeable. The meanings we give to situations are the result of the interpretive procedures we use, especially taking the role of the other. So again, it's very important that we're able to do this, that we're able to empathise, because that will help us with this interpretative process or procedure. Whilst our actions may be partly predictable because we internalise others' expectations, there is still some room for negotiation or choice. So what does this mean? This means that over time, it does become possible to kind of predict how people will behave, because if we're all interpreting the same symbols in the same way, we're generally going to behave the same way. So again, on the road, we turn left when we should turn left, we stop at the red light, we don't turn right because there's a no turn right sign, for example. That makes everyone on the road very predictable. However, there is always the opportunity for negotiation and choice. You could, for example, break the rules if you so decide to. And as we know, unfortunately on the roads, that's something that often people decide to do. The best known application of interactionist or symbolic interactionist ideas is labelling theory. Now, this is something that we've spent an awful lot of time focusing upon. You would have done a lot of this in your first year and your second year, so I won't labour this too much. But as a reminder, it's made up of three key concepts. Firstly, defining something labels it. This will have consequences as it shapes our actions. Every time we experience something, we label it, and depending on the label we give it, that will change or shape our behaviour towards it, whatever it may be. Next, the looking glass self. We internalise others' labels and create a self-concept which can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, we see ourselves as others see us, and this can lead to either a positive or negative self-fulfilling prophecy. That is, something becomes true simply because it has been predicted to be so. This also can lead to a career, does not always do so, if our master status, that is, the overarching way in which we view ourselves, is affected. We act out the label to become a career something. Now this again can be positive or negative. It could be career drug user or career criminal, or it could be career empath or career hard worker. That's it. Thank you very much.